Okay, so get this. For this deep dive, we've got like two totally different topics.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Right. Building trust in relationships, and recent discoveries about ancient Egypt.
At first glance, you think, like, what do they even have to do with each other?
Exactly. But that's why we're here, right? To find those hidden connections.
I love that. You know me, I love a good challenge. Plus, I think our listeners will walk away with some seriously useful knowledge about both topics.
Absolutely. So where do we even begin? Well, we've got this fascinating article about building trust. It lays out 8 key elements.
Ooh, 8 key elements. Sounds like a recipe for success.
Right. And get this, each one is backed by all this scientific research. So we're not just talking about, touchy-feely stuff here. This is legit.
No gut feelings, just cold, hard facts. I like it.
Exactly. So first up, transparency and honesty. Turns out there's this Harvard study that found that being open and upfront actually strengthens relationships.
Makes sense when you think about it. Like, who wants to be with someone who's always hiding things?
Right. It just breeds suspicion and doubt. Like, what are they hiding? What are they not telling me?
Totally. Transparency builds that foundation of trust. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, I trust you enough to be real with you, even when it's hard.
Exactly. Okay, next up. Commitment and reliability. The Journal of Experimental Social Psychology, they did a study that found that keeping your promises, even when things get tough, that builds trust like nothing else.
Yeah, you're not just saying it, you're doing it. You're showing up.
You're proving that you're someone people can count on. Like, you say you'll be there, no matter what.
That consistency, that dependability, it's huge GE.
Okay, so we've got honesty and we've got reliability. Now we're moving on to connection. So, effective communication, empathy, and shared values. The University of Maryland and the Journal of Social Psychology.
Hold on, 2 heavy hitters right there.
Yeah. They've both got studies that show these 3 things are essential for building strong bonds.
It's like, how can you connect with someone if you can't communicate, if you don't understand where they're coming from, if you don't have anything in common?
And that empathy piece, it's so important. Being able to really listen, show you care, that goes a long way.
Totally. Like, you're basically saying, I see you, I hear you, and I get you. That creates a powerful connection.
Okay, next up, credibility and taking responsibility.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Right. It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. The Journal of Business Ethics, they found that being genuine and owning your mistakes actually makes people trust you more.
Seriously, even in a professional setting.
Yeah, it's like everyone makes mistakes, but it's how you handle them that really matters.
It shows your integrity. People can tell if you're just trying to save face or if you're truly committed to learning and growing.
And last but not least, continuous interaction. I mean, this one seems pretty obvious, right? The more we interact with someone, the more opportunities we have to build trust.
Right, more face time, more trust. Simple.
But there's more to it than that. The Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, they found that it's not just about quantity, it's about the quality of those interactions. Like, the more we interact, the deeper that trust can become.
It's like each interaction adds another layer to the foundation. You're building a history together, shared experiences.
Okay, so before we jump into ancient Egypt, let's take a second to think about all of this. These 8 elements of trust, how do they show up in your relationships? Which ones are you good at? Which ones are maybe a bit more challenging? Okay, ready for a trip back in time? We're talking ancient Egypt. Pyramids, pharaohs, the whole shebang.
Oh yeah, it's way more than just those iconic pyramids, right?
Like, when you really dive into it, it's about the people, their beliefs, their whole world. It's pretty mind-blowing.
Totally different worldview than ours. And, as we'll see, it's all connected to that concept of trust we were just talking about.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Okay, so pyramids. I'll admit, I used to think, like, maybe aliens helped build them.
The alien theory is pretty popular.
It is. But turns out, nope. The research is pointing to some pretty ingenious engineering, using ramps to move those massive stones.
Yeah, it's incredible what humans can accomplish when they put their minds to it.
Right, like imagine the planning, the manpower, the sheer coordination to pull that off.
The logistics are mind-boggling. The prevailing theories focus on these inclined ramps, or maybe even spiral ramps.
Wow, spiral ramps, that's fascinating.
Yeah. But each type would have presented its own set of challenges. They had to figure out how to haul those massive stones while maintaining the precise angles and dimensions needed for the pyramid structure.
It's hard to even wrap your head around it. Okay, now let's talk about the pharaohs. We tend to picture them as these all-powerful rulers, living in luxury.
Living like gods, right.
Yeah, exactly. But their lives were actually super intertwined with religion and the afterlife.
It wasn't just about ruling in this life. It was about preparing for the next one.
So they weren't just living it up, they were like constantly thinking about the afterlife.
Totally. They believed in gods like Ra, the sun god, and Osiris, the god of the underworld. And these beliefs influenced everything, especially their tombs and burial rituals.
Right, because the pyramids weren't just monuments to their power, they were like gateways to eternal life.
Exactly. And get this, the ancient Egyptians were also pretty incredible healers, like seriously skilled.
Whoa, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, we're talking surgical tools, herbal remedies, even medical texts written on papyrus scrolls.
They had like brain surgery and stuff back then.
Well, not exactly brain surgery, but they did perform some surprisingly complex procedures. And their mummification practices required a deep understanding of anatomy and preservation techniques.
That's amazing. And we're still learning new things about them all the time.
Right.
Like archaeologists are making new discoveries all the time, new tombs, workshops, and they're using all this high-tech stuff like radiocarbon dating to analyze everything.
It's like putting together a giant puzzle with new pieces being discovered all the time.
Yeah. And it just makes you wonder, like, what else will we uncover?
Okay, so we've talked trust, we've dipped our toes into ancient Egypt, ready to connect the dots.
Let's do it. I'm all about making connections.
Okay, so think about those pharaohs ruling for centuries. How did trust play into all of that? Did they embody those 8 elements of trust we talked about earlier?
You mean like, were they honest, reliable? Did they have their people's best interests at heart?
Exactly. Like, how did all of that factor into their leadership and the stability of their reign? It's easy to get caught up in all the, the grandeur of the pyramids and the pharaohs, but what about the everyday Egyptians? Like, did they trust their leaders?
Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Did those pharaohs actually walk the walk when it came to trust?
Exactly. So let's go back to those 8 pillars of trust we talked about earlier. Did the pharaohs embody them?
Let's see. So starting with transparency. Well, we know the pharaohs built all these huge public works projects, right? Temples, irrigation canals, all that stuff. Right, like those weren't just for show, they actually benefited the people, right? Like irrigation, that meant more food for everyone.
Exactly. It's like they were showing the people, hey, this is what we're doing with your resources. And look, it's making your lives better.
So that's a form of transparency, right? Being open about how they were using resources, how it was impacting people's lives.
Yeah, totally. And that probably went a long way in building trust. What about commitment and reliability? We know the pharaohs were seen as like intermediaries between the gods and the people.
Right, like they had all these religious duties,
Yeah.
right? Performing rituals, making sure the Nile flooded so the crops would grow.
Exactly. And by fulfilling those duties, they were showing their commitment to the people's well-being.
So they weren't just, saying, hey, I'm going to take care of you. They were actually doing it.
They were walking the walk,
Yeah.
which definitely reinforces credibility. You can't have trust without credibility.
Right. Okay, so we've got transparency, commitment, credibility. But what about empathy? Like, did the pharaohs actually care about their people?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Ancient Egypt was, a pretty hierarchical society. The pharaoh was at the top. Everyone else was, well, not.
Right. So it's hard to imagine them, like, really connecting with the average person.
Yeah. But some pharaohs were known for, enacting laws to protect the vulnerable.
Mm.
Or they would start these big building projects to create jobs when times were tough.
So even if they weren't, like, emotionally connected, they were doing things that showed some level of empathy.
Yeah, exactly. They were taking actions that had a positive impact on people's lives, which I guess is a form of empathy in its own right.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because all of these pillars, they kind of work together, right? Like, let's take shared values. The ancient Egyptians were incredibly religious, right? And the pharaoh was like the ultimate embodiment of their values.
Totally. The pharaoh was considered divine. He
Yeah.
was like the link between the gods and the people. So their values were aligned, right? People believed in the same things. They had a shared sense of purpose.
And that alignment, that makes sense. Like, people are more likely to trust someone who shares their values.
Exactly. Like you feel like you're on the same page, working towards the same goals. It's like that glue that holds society together.
Okay, but even with all of this, even with these pillars of trust in place, I'm sure there were times when that trust was broken.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, ancient Egypt wasn't some perfect utopia, right? There were rebellions, power struggles, all that stuff.
Right, just like in any society, there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be people who are trying to, grab power for themselves.
Yeah, and when that happens, when trust breaks down,
Yeah.
things can get messy. It can lead to instability, even the downfall of a civilization.
So, what have we learned? Well, building trust isn't some new age concept. It's as old as the pyramids. And those 8 pillars, they're not just for personal relationships.
Nope, they're everywhere. They're at play in our workplaces, communities, even on a global scale.
So the next time you see a picture of those magnificent pyramids, think about the human element. Think about the trust, the collaboration, the shared vision that it took to create them.
And think about what can happen when that trust erodes, when those pillars crumble. It's a reminder that trust is precious, something we need to work at, something we need to protect.
Food for thought, right. Well, that's it for this deep dive into trust and ancient Egypt. Thanks for joining us. And remember, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep building those strong foundations in your own lives.